Here we are going to talk about the client-server interaction workflow. It's kind of like the general interaction workflow between the real-time the information exchange between the client and also the server. So before we talk about the workflow, let's kind of let's quickly identify the possible web resources that you can use when you are developing Mashup application. And here we categorize the web resources according to different aspects, and then from those different aspects, it also affects how easy or how difficult it is to collect or retrieve those information, and how those web resources could be utilized in your web Mashup application. So actually, the web resources could be the data. It could be a data file, a certain file, or a certain like organized data format, or some images, or it could be also some process. For example, like routing service or geonames service. So the resources, it could be the file or it could be the service. And the first kind of way to categorize the web resources in terms of how they are going to be utilized in the Mashup application is depends on whether they support API or not. Whether they support API or not. So when you are considering for example, you can say if you are going to create a Mashup application, then the first thing that you should do is to find out whether that resource has an API or not. So if there's no API, then it's more difficult to utilize the information from the resource, from this web resource. But however, if that web resource it provides an API, then in this case, it's kind of like the provider of this web resource. It has a certain mindset that this web resource could be reused by the third-party application. So in this case, it's usually easier to retrieve the resources are usually easier to be retrieved by following their API. Okay, and so if the web resource has an API, then it could be a different types of API. So the general API type that we have mentioned before was in the unit of the web service. So as you can see, the web services they could have the web service protocol defining the request and response. You can say format, and also the data model, and also the protocol. So in this case, this is a type of API that we have mentioned before. Then you can design your application or your client according to the web service API to understand how to communicate with the web service, how to send and request, and when you receive a response, and how to parse the information out of the response. So this is one type of APIs, and the other type of API is kind of like it is the browser side API. So basically that means the web resource actually directly provide you a certain library, and that library allow you to be included into your application, and in this case through the library. Usually, those library are sometimes called SDK. So the meaning of the SDK is that when you are going to utilize a certain service, and then the service protocol may be difficult to be utilized, and then may be complex, then in this case the tool, the provider may directly give you a certain library like the SDK, and those the SDK could be included into your application in different language as well. And then in this case, in your program, you can directly utilize the interface provided in that specific programming language, and then that library will handle the communication with the web resources, and then you can directly retrieve all those information from the provided browser-side API or application-side API. So that's the second level of the possibility. And then the third level of possibility to categorize the web resource. First, let's talk about the web services. So the web services, they are generally they are defining the protocol, the web service protocol that you are going to use to communicate with the web service, and finally access the web resources. And the web service could be kind of categorized into the RESTful service that is more modern and more lightweight to use, as we mentioned before, especially compared to the more traditional, one of the more traditional solution, which is the SOAP, the SOAP web service type. So, but well, nowadays people tend to use the RESTful service more compared to the SOAP service. But however, like I mentioned before, the services could exist without following the RESTful style or SOAP standard. So any type of web service application that serves some web resources, it could still be called as web service and web service with their specific web service API. So there could be other types of web service as well. And in terms of the browser-side API, actually, it mainly can be identified as two categories. One is the JavaScript API. So because here we identify it as the browser-side API, so which means that the API or SDK is mainly for the mainly to be executed on the web browser, and then in this case to write some program on and to be executed on the web browser. Then most of the time we are using the JavaScript language. So this in this case, the browser-side API, most of the time it will be the JavaScript API. It will be the JavaScript API. Okay, but however, there could be other types of API for the application construction. For example, you could be C# API, it could be the Java API, and those different APIs they could be supporting the browser, supporting the web applications executed on the browsers. But however, those programming languages are not for the direct use from the browser. Instead, what the developers can do is they could use the web service, the Mashup server. They could use the server side to support those APIs, and then in this case, you can utilize those functionality in different programming languages. And finally, those retrieved web services can be organized and then to support the client-side application. So this is one way to organize, or you can say categorize, the web resources in terms of how they can be utilized in the Mashup application. Okay, and here is another way to compare the two types of APIs, the web service API and also the browser-side API. In terms of the execution, look where the process are going to be executed, and in terms of their programming language capabilities, and also some of the and also their the APIs relationships with the application. So let's take a quick look over here. in terms of the execution location, of course, if it's a web service API, then the where the request was handled is in the web server, or is mainly in the on the web servers. But however, on the other hand, the browser side API, because usually it could be the JavaScript API. So the place that the developers or the programs that is going to use this API is on the web browsers. In terms of the programming language, web services, because it's usually a web protocol that it defines, the web protocol API that it defines. So pretty much like all types of programming language they can be utilized to communicate with the web services. So in different programming languages, they usually has the support of the web communication. So if it's a web service API, then basically that means it's pretty independent of the languages, the programming languages. You could use JavaScript, you could use Java, C#, and Python, and other types of programming language to utilize the resources supported by the web services. And if it's a browser-side API, and then usually it usually directly give you a certain SDK, some certain library, and that library was specifically designed and developed according to a certain language, a certain programming language. So it usually dependent on the specific languages. And in terms of the capabilities, the web services usually provide some server-side functions, and then it could be utilizing the databases, and also it doesn't really provide a user interface. So the server-side functions could be well, here I am trying to indicate is the functionality that are you can say time and also computational intensive, that cannot be easily supported by the user's end device. So in this case, those functionalities are more suitable to be executed on the web server. And databases as well. Besides the processing, the large amount of data the big data storage is also one of the issue for the end devices. So databases is also one of the important capabilities to the web service API. And as we mentioned in the unit of the service, the web services are usually tend to be used by other programs on the web, and in this case, no user interfaces are required. So in this case, no user interface is the common way that web services provide. In terms of the browser-side API, it usually provides some lightweight browser-side functionalities, some simple processing or the presentation visualizations. So those easy functions or lightweight functions are usually supported by the browser-side API. And sometimes it also provides some UI graphical user interface, so that users can easily utilize those APIs. If it provides the graphical user interface, and it also could have some support of the user interaction as well. So that's the browser-side API capabilities. And finally, in terms of the relationship, the web services they are waiting to be called, or to be they are waiting to receive request from the you can say from the application or from the client. Okay, so but for the browser side API, it's actually usually it could be linking to some web services to retrieve specific information. So basically, the browser side API is may have some web services that needs to be linked. Okay, that's a simple and quick comparison between this type of server side, this type of web service API and also the browser side API. And finally, here we are going to talk about the interaction workflow between the client side and server side. For example, if right now you want to exchange information between the browser and also the service, or easier like example is kind of like the users, the users want to retrieve some information from the services. It happens a lot in many applications. We want to retrieve some information from the server. And then in this case, let's break the whole process down to the you can say the actions level. So what kind of actions or what kind of things that the browser side needs to do, and what are the tasks or actions that the service side needs to take so that the client and server they can interchange information. So first of all, if that's start from the browser side, then what you can do is you can have a user interface. You could have a map. You could have a button. You could have a certain URL, for example. So users they can have the user interface to interact with. So when the user interacts with that interface, for example, zoom in, zoom out on the map, or pressing a button, for example, like that, then the browser side will trigger the event of the communication between the client and server. So what it needs to do is to organize the parameters. Alright, you need to organize the parameters. For example, if right now the client wants to retrieve a certain information from the server side, let's just say the client wants to retrieve the you can say weather forecasting for you can say let's just say Taipei city for the next 3 days. So in this case, the user interaction may need to specify those criteria. For example, like the location, like the Taipei city region, and also the time, which will be the next 3 days, and also maybe the topic that the user want to retrieve. For example, the weather forecasting. So those information will be organized. Into parameters according to the service API, or according to the service API. So after the browser side organize those parameters, you will send the request, HTTP request to the service. Alright, we will send to the service, and the service will receive that request, and then according to the API document that it defines, it knows how to parse the parameters out of those HTTP requests. So, and then after parsing the request, it receives some parameters. Then the server side will understand what the users wants to do. So in this case, the server or service will perform the processing, according to the parameters that the service just parsed. And after the processing, you may have you can say query some data from the database, or do some processings, for example, like a routing or geonames, and then after that you have a certain answer to the query. And then in this case, the processing will becomes the organizing of the response. Will be the organizing of the response. And after the response has been organized, and then the service will send back the response to the browser, and the browser will receive the response, and then finally the response was like packaged according to the service API. Alright, the response was packaged according to the service API. So, for example, the service API may be telling you that the response format should be JSON, or should be XML, or should be plain text. So those are the information that you need to know before you try to utilize that service. And then after that, after receiving the response, and then what the browser side needs to do is to parse the information from the response. Is to parse the information from the response. And after the browser side parse the information, then with the new information, then we can modify the user interface. And with the new user interface, we could have some more user interaction, and then organize the parameters, send requests, receive requests, and parse the parameter, do some processing, and organize responses, and then send back the response to the browser side, and parse the results, and then to update the user interaction. So it's kind of like the endless loop over here for the interaction between the client side and also the server side.